An old woman finds a forgotten camera in her attic. Inside, a soldier's final photo and a secret he never got to deliver. But the picture wasn't meant for her. So why does it have her face? And a message to a daughter no one knew existed. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain had started just before dusk, soft and unhurried, like it had nowhere to be. Keanu Reeves pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders as he stepped out of his rental car, the windshield wipers still ticking slowly behind him. The town was quiet, just a few lights on in narrow storefront windows, the kind with faded, hand-painted lettering and dusty glass that never quite looked clean no matter the weather. He hadn't planned to stop here long. Just a few quiet days in his late uncle's cottage outside town. No cameras, no press, no meetings. Just trees, stillness, and a long overdue silence. As he made his way down the main street, his eyes caught on a small window display that didn't seem to belong to any particular time. An antique lamp flickered inside, casting shadows across a cluttered counter full of old postcards, porcelain dishes, and a small toy train that looked like it hadn't run since the 60s. Above the window was a sign, Holt's Antique. He pushed open the door, a little brass bell chiming gently overhead. The scent of cedar and thyme filled the room. Old books, polished furniture, forgotten stories. Behind the counter stood a woman, straight-backed and dignified, her gray hair pinned into a tidy bun. She looked up from a ledger, her eyes sharp but kind. "You're soaked," she said plainly. Keanu offered a soft smile. "Just passing through. Mind if I look around a bit?" She nodded once. "You're welcome to, though I'm not sure what you'll find worth taking home." He glanced around at the shelves. Sometimes the best things aren't obvious at first. That made her pause. She looked at him again, this time more carefully. "Most people who come in here don't say things like that," she said. "They're usually looking for something specific." He raised an eyebrow. "What about you? Do you ever find something unexpected?" There was the smallest hesitation. Then she reached beneath the counter and pulled out a dusty brown camera, the kind with a winding crank and a heavy shutter. She cradled it in both hands. "This was in my attic," she said. "Found it 2 weeks ago while cleaning. Belonged to someone I knew long ago." Keanu stepped closer, intrigued. "Still works?" She shook her head. "I wouldn't dare try. There's film inside. Hasn't been touched since 1971. He looked at her, and something about the way her hands trembled ever so slightly told him there was more to the story. "Hey, why haven't you opened it?" he asked gently. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Because it was the last thing he left me, and maybe the only part of him I still have." "What happened to him?" She met his eyes and said just one word. "Vietnam." She set the camera down slowly, as if it might shatter from being remembered too hard. Keanu glanced at the make, an old Nikon F-series, the kind war correspondents once carried on their shoulders. Its metal was dulled by time, but intact. The lens cap was still secured, the film compartment taped shut with yellowing electrical tape. "His name was James," she said. "James Cross, but everyone called him Jimmy." Keanu leaned gently against the counter, listening. "We met at the university just outside Sacramento. I was studying literature. He studied nothing, officially, but everything else unofficially. Art, mostly. He used to sketch people in the quad. Said it helped him remember faces he might never see again." Her hands traced the edge of the counter. "He wasn't like the others. There was this calm about him, not a laziness, just a stillness, as if he understood something the rest of us hadn't caught up to yet." Keanu nodded once, letting the silence fill what didn't need words. "We weren't together long," she continued. "Barely a year. He got drafted just before graduation, left me a note and that camera. Slipped both into my mailbox the morning he deployed. Did you write back? Keanu asked. I tried, but by the time my letter reached his unit, they said he was gone. Some jungle outside Quang Tri. She inhaled slowly, her face set in a kind of quiet grace that came from living with absence for too long. I never married, she added. People assume it was because I was particular or stubborn or too independent. But the truth is, I never stopped loving a boy I only had 1 year with. Keanu didn't speak. He simply looked down at the camera again. You said there's film inside, he finally said. She nodded. I always thought if I opened it, it would end something, like I'd finally admit he wasn't coming back. But he didn't come back, Keanu said gently. No, she whispered. He didn't. They stood there a moment longer. Outside, the rain was still falling, the windows streaked with faint trails of water. The town was mostly asleep now. A few headlights passed by without pause. What would you want to see? Keanu asked. Eleanor's fingers tightened over the countertop. Anything, just to know what he saw, what mattered enough to him to use the last few frames. He looked at her, and then at the camera, then back again. Maybe it's time, he said softly. Maybe it's waited long enough. Eleanor exhaled, her eyes blinking back something deeper than tears. Maybe, she said, but not alone. Keanu glanced around the store again, his eyes tracing the weathered shelves and faded photographs hanging in frames that hadn't moved in years. It wasn't just a shop. It was a time capsule, a heartbeat caught between decades. Do you develop film here? He asked. Eleanor gave a dry laugh, shaking her head. No. I used to send things out years ago, but the only place left now is a small studio 2 towns over. Old man named Marshall still runs it. Says he does it for the love, not the money. Keanu looked back down at the camera. Then maybe we go see Marshall tomorrow. She hesitated, her expression uncertain. I don't want to get my hopes up. The film could be ruined. Or blank. Maybe, he said, but maybe not. She studied him for a long moment, like she was trying to read something behind his calm demeanor. You're not from here? She finally said. No, he admitted. Just staying a few days at my uncle's cottage out near Tiller Ridge. He passed last spring. I've been meaning to come back, tidy things up. You sound like someone who understands what it means to hold on, she said. I think we all do, he replied. For a while, they said nothing more. Eleanor carefully rewrapped the camera in a soft cloth and tucked it beneath the counter again, though now it sat a little closer to her, no longer hidden in the back corner. Keanu thanked her, reaching for the door. The rain had slowed to a mist, the sky a dark wash of violet and gray. Just before he stepped outside, Eleanor spoke once more. I never told anyone about him, she said. Not really. It just faded into the background of my life. I got used to people not asking. Keanu looked back at her and smiled, quiet and steady. Sometimes the people who never ask are the ones willing to listen the longest. Eleanor's lips pressed into a soft, thoughtful line. She gave a small nod. Come by in the morning, she said. If I'm going to do this, I want to do it with someone who understands why it matters. I'll be here, Keanu promised. And with that, he stepped out into the mist, the old camera's story already beginning to turn once more. Eleanor unlocked the attic door with a rusted key she hadn't touched in years. The narrow staircase groaned beneath her as she climbed, Keanu close behind, his footsteps careful and respectful. The air grew still and dry, filled with the scent of cedar, old paper, and something older still. Time held in boxes. She reached for a pull cord, and a single bare bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows against the angled walls. Dust particles danced in the glow. For a moment, Eleanor just stood there, her hand resting on the banister, remembering the last time she had come up. It's funny, she said, How you can live a whole life with something right above your head and pretend it isn't there. Keanu gave a small nod. We all have rooms like that. She moved slowly toward an old chest pushed up against the wall, its lid draped in a yellowed sheet. She peeled it back and opened the box. Inside was a folded wool scarf, a stack of handwritten postcards, and, resting on top of a worn hardcover novel, the camera. She lifted it gently, her hand steady but reverent. "It's colder than I remember," she whispered. Keanu stepped closer. "It's still beautiful." The metal casing was smooth and unblemished, the lens cap snug, the old tape still wound securely around the film compartment. "I've never even opened the back," Eleanor said, her voice hushed like she was in a chapel. "He left it for me with a note that said, 'For when I come back.'" Keanu watched her eyes, saw the flicker of memory tighten them. Ames shrugged. "Didn't come back," she added. She reached into the box again and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the edges soft from decades of being read and reread. She held it out to Keanu. "I want you to read this." He opened the letter carefully. The ink was still bold, the writing neat and full of small flourishes. A soldier's hand with a poet's mind. Ida read, "If you're reading this, then I'm probably a few thousand miles away and missing your laugh like oxygen. The camera's for you. I want you to see the world the way I do, frame by frame, light and shadow, what we remember and what we leave behind. Take care of it, take care of you, and don't forget to look for the light when it's hard to find. I'll be back before the snow, promise. All my love, Jimmy." Keanu folded the letter gently and handed it back. Eleanor didn't take it right away. She just stared down at the camera, her thumb brushing against the shutter button. "I used to believe that promise," she said, "every winter, every snowfall." "And now?" Keanu asked softly. She met his gaze. "Now I just want to know what he left me." Keanu helped her back down the stairs, the camera now carefully wrapped in a soft hand towel. She held it like something fragile, something unfinished, something that still held breath. Downstairs, the antique store was still empty, still quiet. Eleanor placed the camera on the counter and sat behind it. She looked older under the soft lighting now, not because of age, but because of the weight she had chosen to carry alone for so long. "I don't know why I didn't open it," she said. "Part of me thought, what if it's nothing? What if the pictures are ruined or blurred? Or what if they show me something I wasn't ready to see?" Keanu didn't respond right away. He sat across from her, hands loosely clasped on the table between them. "Do you think he meant for you to wait?" he asked. She thought about it. "I think he meant to come back. And when he didn't, I didn't know how to let go without losing him completely." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes we hold on to the unopened things, because opening them means facing the silence that comes next." Eleanor swallowed hard. "He mailed that package the day before he left. I remember it like it was yesterday. My hands shook when I opened the box. The letter was on top, and under it was the camera. It smelled like him, like smoke and cologne and summer." She glanced at the camera again. "I didn't tell anyone about it, not my sister, not my friends. It became this private shrine, and as the years passed, it just became easier not to disturb it." "But you didn't throw it away?" Keanu said gently. "No," she said, "because even after all the birthdays and Christmases and long, quiet winters, some part of me still believed the role of film mattered." Keanu stood up slowly. "I think it does, and I think it still can." Eleanor hesitated. "There's a studio you mentioned?" "Marshall's photo shop," he said. "An hour's drive east. I passed the sign on my way into town. It looked closed, but had a 'Back in 10' sign taped to the door. I haven't been to that side of the valley in 20 years, she said. Keanu offered a half smile. "Then maybe it's time." She looked at him, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone safe. Someone who didn't ask too much. Someone who didn't need her to explain what this really meant. She stood, slowly but with purpose. "Let me get my coat." The drive was slow and quiet. Fog rolled along the two-lane road like breath over a mirror, blurring the edges of the pine trees and utility poles. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat of Keanu's rental car, the camera resting on her lap beneath her gloved hands. Every so often, she looked down at it, not to check it, but as if to remind herself it was still real. "I used to come this way with my father," she said after a while. "We'd stop for blackberry pie at a roadside stand that's long gone now. It feels strange. How much you can remember about the past, even when you've forgotten what you had for breakfast." Keanu smiled slightly. "Maybe the heart remembers what the mind..." She turned her head toward the window. "Then this must be one of those days where the heart is louder than usual." Marshall's photo shop sat on the corner of a nearly vacant block. The sign above the door had a faded sun graphic and the letters EST, 1975. The parking lot was cracked with weeds, but inside a soft orange glow illuminated rows of film canisters and dusty display prints. They stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing once. Marshall, a white-haired man in suspenders, looked up from behind the counter. His eyes narrowed with curiosity, then widened when he saw Eleanor. "Ellie Holt," he said, standing. "I'll be damned. You still know how to find trouble?" Eleanor smiled. "Only the meaningful kind." Keanu stepped forward and placed the wrapped towel on the counter. "We were hoping you could help us develop a role." Marshall peeled the towel back and let out a low whistle. "Haven't seen one of these in years. She's clean." "Where'd she come from?" Eleanor's voice was steady. "A soldier, someone I once loved." Marshall looked between them and nodded once. "I'll do it myself. No charge. Might take a few hours, but I'll call when it's done." Eleanor's fingers trembled as she handed the camera over. "Thank you, Marshall." He looked her in the eyes. Some memories deserve to be handled slow. As they stepped back into the cool air, Eleanor paused on the sidewalk. Keanu asked softly, "You okay?" She looked up at the sky. "I'm scared." "But not of what's on the film." "What then?" "Of what I might have missed by waiting so long." Keanu nodded. "Then maybe today we find something you didn't miss. Something that waited for you too." She exhaled slowly, the mist curling from her lips. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Holt allowed herself to hope. Back at the cottage, the rain had eased into a soft mist, painting the windows in a delicate haze. Keanu sat alone at the small kitchen table, a warm cup of tea untouched beside his open journal. The photo studio had promised to call once the film was ready, but for now, all they could do was wait. He picked up his phone and opened the app, where he occasionally posted anonymous prompts. A quiet habit. He rarely responded to comments, but he always read them. There was something about asking the world a question and seeing what rose to the surface. He typed, "Have you ever held on to something because you weren't ready to let go?" Then, hit post. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, the replies started appearing. "My father's army boots. I still have them by the door. He's been gone 12 years. A voicemail from my sister. I haven't listened to it since the day she passed, but I can't delete it. A piece of sheet music. My husband wrote it before he died. I still can't play it without crying. The dress I wore the day he said goodbye. I never wore it again, but I never gave it away. A roll of film. I still haven't opened it. 40 years later. Maybe I never will." Keanu stared at that last one for a long time. Across town, Eleanor sat in her living room, wrapped in a shawl she'd crocheted during the long winters. The camera sat beside her on the coffee table, next to the framed photo of her college graduation. She didn't need to respond to the post. She somehow knew who had written it. She simply looked at the camera again and leaned forward. Her hands were steady as she opened her purse and gently placed it inside, zipping it shut. She sat back in her chair and folded her hands in her lap. She didn't need to say it out loud, but the moment spoke for her. She was ready. Later that night, as Keanu walked Eleanor home from a brief stroll down the block, she stopped him just outside her front porch. "I saw your question," she said softly. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "Did you ever let go?" she asked. He considered it. "Not completely, but I think sometimes holding on is the only way we survive long enough to let go on our terms." Eleanor smiled. "Then maybe I just needed someone to remind me it was still my choice." Keanu nodded. "It always was." The porch light flickered on above them, casting long shadows across the quiet street. Inside her bag, the camera rested, the film untouched for decades, now only hours away from revealing what had waited in silence. The following morning, Eleanor moved with an unusual energy. She had opened her curtains early, made herself a pot of tea, and even laid out a soft cardigan she hadn't worn in years. The blue one, James once said, brought out her eyes. The antique store stayed closed that day. A handwritten sign on the door simply read, "Be back soon, gone developing something important." Keanu arrived just after 10. Eleanor was already waiting on her porch, the camera bag resting beside her feet like an old companion. She didn't look nervous anymore. She looked certain. They drove in silence again, but this time the air between them wasn't heavy. It felt expectant, almost sacred. At Marshall's photo shop, a different kind of quiet greeted them. The lights were on. A curtain in the back room swayed gently with movement. Marshall appeared, holding a small envelope with both hands like it was something alive. "They won't last," the kid said simply. "All of them." Eleanor exhaled, long and slow. Her hands reached for the envelope, but stopped. "Would you?" she said, looking to Keanu. He nodded. "Of course." He took the envelope, slid it open, and pulled out the stack of glossy prints. The edges curled slightly from the fresh chemicals, the smell faint but familiar. The first few were of landscapes. Old town corners, fields behind what must be a college campus, the shadows of trees stretching across pavement like arms reaching out. Then came one of a small group of students laughing on a lawn. Keanu glanced at Eleanor. Her hand went to her chest. Then, near the bottom of the stack, there it was. A photo of Eleanor, young, luminous, caught in motion. Her hair was windblown, her eyes red from crying, but smiling, truly smiling. Keanu flipped the photo over. There, in faded handwriting. "If I don't come home, find her. She'll need to know the truth." The room was still. Marshall cleared his throat softly. "He took that the day before he shipped out, didn't he?" Eleanor nodded, blinking fast. "I never even knew he still had the camera. I thought he'd mailed it to me empty, just a goodbye gesture." Keanu placed the photo gently into her hands. "Have left a message," he said. "For someone else." Eleanor looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Keanu held out the envelope again. One more slip of paper had been tucked behind the photos, a smaller note, in the same handwriting. But this one was addressed, "Two of Pirates in the Jungle, to Angela." Eleanor stared. "Who's Angela?" she whispered. Keanu met her eyes. "Ermin," he said quietly, "is what we're going to find out." Back at Eleanor's home, the note sat between them on the coffee table. The handwriting was unmistakably Jimmy's, strong, slightly slanted, and full of quiet urgency. She didn't open it at first. She just stared at the name. "Angela," she repeated softly. He never mentioned her, not once. Keanu gave her space, saying nothing. "Kathy wrote to me about the heat in Saigon, about the jokes his platoon made, about missing my cinnamon rolls," she said, her voice threading between laughter and pain. "But not about a daughter." The word landed gently in the room. Ador's hands shook slightly as she reached for the note, unfolding it slowly. The paper crackled like something sacred. It was short. "Angela, if life keeps me from you, know this. I loved you before I ever met you. I left something with someone I trust. Find her. She'll show you what I couldn't." Here, tears rolled down Eleanor's cheeks before she even finished. "Hurried me to my hotel room." Replacement. He trusted me with something I never knew I had, she whispered. He was preparing for the worst and still thinking of both of us. Keanu sat across from her, quiet and grounded. It sounds like he wanted her to know she wasn't forgotten. Eleanor looked at him. But how do we find her? No last name, no address. I wouldn't even know where to begin. We have the note, Keanu said. We have a name. And we have his. She looked at him, uncertain. Sometimes a name is enough, he said. Especially when someone's been waiting their whole life for it. Eleanor looked down at the photo again. Her younger self, captured through the lens of a man who had loved her even as he carried another story in his heart. A part of her hurt, but another part, deeper and older, felt something different. Not betrayal, not loss. Right. She placed the photo and the letter gently into a small box and closed it with care. I don't know what she'll think of me, she said finally. Keanu nodded. You don't have to know. You just have to be willing to meet her. Eleanor sat back, the box still in her lap, as if holding a promise not made by her, but entrusted to her. All the same, she was no longer just remembering Jimmy. She was now carrying the unfinished thread of his love forward. And tomorrow, they would begin to trace it. The sky was still overcast when Keanu pulled the car up to the small specialty film lab on the outskirts of Ashbury. Eleanor sat beside him in silence, the padded camera bag resting gently on her lap. Her hands were steady now. Not calm, not at peace, but ready. The studio was quiet, run by a man in his 70s named Curtis, who still believed in the magic of dark rooms and analog film. His fingers, stained faintly with developer, handled the camera like an old friend when Eleanor handed it over. We'll be gentle with her, he promised, eyeing the vintage metal body with appreciation. Kodachrome, I bet. It always finds a way to hold on to the truth. They waited in a side room that smelled faintly of fixer and dust. Eleanor paced slowly, one hand trailing along the tops of framed photos on the wall. Weddings, newborns, veterans standing beside tanks. Each frame held a life paused in time, a story locked in grain and chemistry. Keanu sat on the bench nearby, watching her, giving her space. Do you think it'll say anything? She asked suddenly. He looked up. The film? She nodded. I think it already is. When Curtis finally returned, he didn't say a word. He simply handed them a sealed envelope. Inside, the freshly developed photos. Eleanor's hands trembled as she pulled the flap open and slid the stack out. The first few frames were simple. Campus buildings bathed in morning light. A row of bicycles lined against a wall. A bookstore with its wooden sign swaying. Then came people. Students smiling mid-laugh. A professor gesturing, with chalk still in hand. A close-up of a jazz band's brass instruments, frozen in a shining arc. And then, Eleanor gasped, her breath catching in her throat. There she was, young, radiant, backlit by the sun. Her eyes were red, but her smile was defiant, almost grateful, like she knew she was being captured not for memory, but for someone who hadn't yet been born. Keanu gently took the photo, turned it over. On the back, in Jimmy's careful hand, was a message. There you go. If I don't come home, find her. She'll need to know the truth. It was signed, my daughter. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor reached for the photo again, tracing the curve of each letter. Her tears came slowly, not out of sorrow, but reverence. Left this for her? She whispered. Not for me. Keanu nodded softly. He wanted her to know who you were. She stared at the image again. And he wanted her to see how much she meant, even if she never got to hear it from him. Eleanor clutched the photo like it might vanish. She closed her eyes and sat quietly, her thumb gently rubbing the corner of the print where Jimmy's name was signed. The weight of it all pressed down. Decades of silence, grief, love, and now, revelation. I didn't know he had a daughter, she said again, her voice thinner this time. "He never told me." Keanu leaned forward slightly. Maybe he didn't know how, or maybe he thought he had time. She shook her head, almost in disbelief. Or maybe he didn't want to break my heart before he left. The studio light overhead flickered softly as Curtis stepped out of the room to give them privacy. Eleanor slowly picked through the rest of the photos. Most were simple scenes, trees, friends, glimpses of everyday life. But now, knowing what she knew, every frame felt like a breadcrumb left behind. Not just for her, for Angela. One photo in particular caught her eye. It was a storefront window, the one where they had kissed before his deployment. She hadn't remembered that he'd had the camera that day. She held it up for Keanu to see. He must have taken this before he walked away. Keanu studied it, quietly. He wanted her to know how it started. Eleanor's eyes brimmed again, but this time a small smile began to form at the corners of her lips. She wasn't just mourning anymore. She was remembering. "What kind of man leaves behind a map without saying where it leads?" she asked softly. "The kind who hopes someone will follow it," Keanu replied. She looked at the back of the photograph again. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. He trusted the image to tell the story. There was silence for a long time, the kind that feels sacred. Then, Eleanor folded the last photo into the envelope and placed it back in the camera bag. She zipped it shut with care and looked at Keanu with a resolve he hadn't seen in her before. "I want to find her." Keanu nodded, already knowing she would say that. "Then we will." They stepped out into the gray light of late afternoon. The sky hadn't changed, but something inside Eleanor had. The past had finally spoken, and it had done so not through letters or rumors or secondhand stories, through light, through film, through the steady hands of a man who knew he might never return but wanted the truth to reach the ones he loved. As they walked down the quiet sidewalk, Eleanor paused at the corner. She looked back at the studio. "Funny, isn't it?" she said, her voice nearly carried off by the breeze. "You live your whole life thinking the story ended, but it turns out it just got delayed in the darkroom." Back at her house, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, the envelope of photos resting in front of her like a sealed truth finally opened. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something deeper. That strange sensation of time collapsing, past and present, folding into one fragile moment. Keanu sat across from her, sipping tea. He hadn't asked any questions. He knew she needed space to process. After a long silence, she reached beneath the table and pulled out an old shoebox wrapped in faded floral paper. She untied the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some yellowed, others curled at the edges. She lifted the top one and laid it gently beside the new photograph. "These were the ones I wrote him," she said. "After he left, I never had an address to send them to." Keanu's gaze softened. "You wrote him anyway." "I had to," she said. "They were the only way I knew how to keep breathing." She sifted through the papers until she found one letter in particular, one written just days after she received word of Jimmy's death. The envelope had never been sealed. The ink had smudged near the signature. Eleanor slid it across the table. "I want her to have this one," she said. "It doesn't matter that I never sent it. It's his, but it's hers now too." Keanu picked it up with care. He didn't read it. He didn't have to. He could feel the weight of it. The ache of a goodbye that was never spoken. "Sheem deserves the whole truth," Eleanor added, quieter now. "Not just what he left behind, but what I carried all these years." Keanu nodded. "And she'll hear it. I'll help you find her." They sat together for a while, the air thick with memory, the kind that doesn't just haunt, it heals. Later that evening, Keanu returned to the guest cottage he was staying in and opened his laptop. He typed slowly, thoughtfully, searching through archived military records, state adoption registries, and veterans' memorials. It wasn't easy. But tucked deep within a digital archive of birth announcements from 1970 was a line that caught his eye. Angela M. Cross, born in Santa Rosa County. Mother, confidential. Father, James D. Cross, deceased, military. His heart skipped. He clicked the record and cross-referenced it with a database of public school educators. Angela Cross, Portland, Oregon, music teacher, early 60s. Keanu leaned back, exhaled slowly, and smiled. He pulled out his phone, took a photo of the letter Eleanor had chosen to share, and sent her a simple message. Found her. Back in her room, Eleanor read the text and pressed the photo to her chest. The story wasn't over, not yet. But the pages had finally begun to turn again. Eleanor hadn't touched the shoebox since the night she and Keanu had unearthed the final photo. But now, under the golden morning light of her small kitchen, she opened it again. There were more letters than she remembered, folded carefully, addressed but never sent. Some were simply thoughts she'd written on torn pages, scraps of longing she never dared say out loud. But in the middle of the box, nestled between a stack of dried flowers and a war bond Jimmy once gave her as a joke, was something different. A small, leather-bound notebook. Her fingers paused, then reached for it. It was his. She recognized the worn binding, the faint blue ink that bled through its edges. Jimmy had carried this notebook in the weeks before his deployment. She remembered him scribbling in it, often in silence, sometimes at the park, sometimes while she read on the porch. When she asked what he was writing, he would only smile and say, "Just sorting things out." She had never seen it again, until now. Eleanor opened it gently. The first few pages were nothing but lyrics, doodles, fragments of half-formed thoughts. Then, near the center, his handwriting shifted. Neater, more serious. "Her name is Angela, and I never got to hold her." Eleanor froze. She traced the words with her fingertip, as if touching them might help them make sense. "I never told Eleanor. I didn't want her to hate me. I didn't want to ruin what we had. But I should have. I should have told them both." The page ended there. She closed the notebook and placed it flat on the table. Her breath came slow, measured. He had wanted to tell her. He had carried that truth like a second dog tag, heavy, close to his chest. And now, all these years later, she held it in her hands. A quiet knock broke the silence. It was Keanu. She let him in without a word and handed him the notebook. He read the page, eyebrows drawn low. "It confirms everything," he said softly. "But there's more." He sat across from her, opened his laptop, and pulled up the adoption database he'd been digging through. His screen showed a declassified military form, half of it blacked out, the rest barely legible. But one line stood out. Dependent. Angela Cross. Relationship. Daughter. Service member. James D. Cross. Eleanor leaned closer. "That's her," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "It's an old government registry of dependents, filed by soldiers before active duty. It looks like Jimmy filled it out just weeks before he deployed." "But why wouldn't anyone tell her?" Eleanor asked. "Why wouldn't they tell Angela?" Keanu exhaled slowly. Maybe her mother didn't know he'd done this, or maybe the form got buried. These documents were never meant to be public. Eleanor looked at the screen again, then back at the notebook. "I don't know what hurts more," she said, voice cracking. "That he kept this from me, or that she grew up not knowing he wanted her." Keanu gently rested a hand on the table. "But we know now, and we can make sure she does too." Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat quietly by the window while Keanu made a few phone calls from the porch. He spoke in low tones, asking questions, confirming names, explaining just enough to open doors, but not so much that anyone felt overwhelmed. When he returned, Eleanor turned to him, hopeful. "Did you find her?" "Not yet," he said, "but I got a lead." He set his notebook down, and showed her a printed sheet from a teacher credentialing board. Angela Cross was listed as an elementary school music instructor in Redding, California, just 3 hours north. There was no photo, no biography, just her name and current employment. But it was something. "She teaches music," Eleanor said softly. "That means she might have a piece of him, without even knowing." Keanu nodded. "If she does, she's been carrying it her whole life." They sat in silence for a long time. Eleanor slowly got up and returned to the shoebox. She pulled out another envelope, thinner than the rest. Inside was the final letter Jimmy had sent her before shipping out. She unfolded it carefully. "Ellie, I'm sorry I haven't been myself. I've been trying to figure out what kind of man I want to be. I think I'm late. You deserve more than someone who disappears into war. You deserve peace, and I'm afraid I might not bring it. But I love you. That's the only thing I know for sure. If I don't make it back, I hope something of me still does. Keep the camera safe. It's got the last things I saw that mattered." Eleanor blinked back tears. She passed the letter to Keanu without saying a word. "I think he meant for this to find her," she whispered. "Maybe all of this was for her." Keanu read the letter again, slower this time. "Do you want me to be the one to tell her?" Eleanor paused, then nodded. "At first, yes. I don't think I could get through it, but eventually, I'd like to meet her, if she wants to." "She will," Keanu said. "She's spent her life missing something. She just doesn't know what." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. The evening light had begun to slant across the floorboards. Shadows stretched like pages turning in slow motion. Keanu opened his laptop again and started searching through social media, teacher directories, and community news bulletins. He didn't want to scare Angela. He just needed to find the right door to knock on. And then he found something. A school newsletter from a small district in Redding. It showed a photo of a smiling teacher at the piano, surrounded by children holding paper instruments. The caption read, "Ms. Cross teaches her students that every note holds a story. Music connects memory." Keanu leaned back in his chair. "That's her." Eleanor leaned over to see the screen. The woman in the photo had Jimmy's eyes. Wide set, a little watchful. Her hair was longer, curled at the ends, and her smile was softer, more hesitant than bright. But there was something unmistakable. Not just in her features, but in the expression. It was like seeing someone both familiar and brand new. "He's beautiful," Eleanor whispered. Keanu saved the photo, then clicked over to a recent school bulletin. It mentioned an upcoming spring recital, where Angela Cross would be conducting her class in original arrangements written by her students. Beneath the article was a quote from Angela herself. "Music helps us remember who we are, even when we don't know the whole story." Keanu and Eleanor looked at each other. It felt like a sign. "She's speaking his language," Eleanor said. "She always was," Keanu replied. "She just didn't know where it came from." They printed the photo, folded it into the notebook beside Jimmy's letter, and placed both into a new envelope. Eleanor wrote a note on top. "You don't know me, but once, I loved the man who gave you your name." Keanu would deliver it himself. No fanfare, no pressure, just a knock on a quiet door, holding a piece of the past no one had been ready for. Until now. And as Eleanor placed the envelope gently on the table, she let out a long breath. Not of grief, but of readiness. Angela Cross didn't look like someone carrying decades of unanswered questions. Her posture was confident, her voice steady, and her classroom neatly organized. Charts of ecosystems, faded posters of animal anatomy, and handwritten quotes on the walls. But Keanu had learned that people who lived with silence often built quiet, unshakable worlds to hold themselves together. He waited outside her classroom after the final bell, holding the envelope Eleanor had entrusted to him. Inside was the old letter from Jimmy, the recent photo of Angela from the school bulletin, and Eleanor's handwritten note. He wasn't sure how to begin, so he didn't start with the truth. Not right away. "Hi," he said, smiling gently. "I'm Keanu Reeves. I'm working with a small community legacy project, documenting stories of veterans and their families. Would you have a moment?" Angela tilted her head, studying him with a curious but polite expression. "Reeves? As in the actor?" He chuckled. "That one." "Well," she said, gesturing to the empty classroom, "I'm not used to surprise visits from movie stars, but I do have 10 minutes before my carpool duty." Keanu stepped inside and glanced around. On her desk was a framed photo, small, black and white, well-worn. A toddler with curly dark hair sat in a backyard, holding a plastic watering can. Next to her, visible only in part, was a man in uniform. The top half of the photo had been torn, clean through his face. Angela caught him looking. "My father? Or, I guess that's what my mother always said." Keanu stayed silent, letting the pause rest. "She told me he left when I was 2, that he wasn't ready for a child. I used to ask about him, but she'd just say he didn't want to be found. So eventually, I stopped asking." She smiled tightly, but there was a glint in her eyes. That old ache hadn't gone. "Did you ever want to know more?" Keanu asked softly. Angela sat back, her arms folding slowly across her chest. She didn't answer immediately. Then, barely audible, she said, "I think I've always wanted that." Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope. He didn't place it on her desk. He held it carefully, like it weighed more than it looked. "I came here because someone loved your father once, a long time ago, and she found something that might belong to you." Angela blinked, her breath catching slightly. "Love?" He nodded. "Before the war, before you were born." She looked at the envelope. "Is this about him? About who he was?" "Yes," Keanu said. "And something he left behind. For you." Angela didn't reach for it right away. She just stared at the paper, then at Keanu, and finally at the torn photo again. "I don't even know what I'd do with the truth," she whispered. "Maybe you don't have to do anything," Keanu replied. "Maybe you just listen." Angela finally reached forward and took the envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the flap. Inside, she found the letter first. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting careful, pressed deeply into the page like the writer knew he wouldn't get another chance. Her eyes moved over the salutation slowly. It wasn't addressed to anyone by name, just "To the one I leave behind." She read in silence. Keanu waited, standing at the edge of her desk, arms relaxed at his sides. He could hear the second hand ticking on the clock above the whiteboard. Outside, a bell rang for the after-school buses. Neither of them moved. Angela's breath caught when she reached the middle of the letter. Her lips parted, then closed. She read it again. The letter wasn't long, but in those few lines Jimmy had written with a kind of softness Angela had never imagined her father possessing. "If I don't come back, don't blame yourself, don't blame your mother. Just know I wanted to know you. I hoped someday someone would help you find me. And if they do, tell them thank you." By the time she reached the signature, her fingers had tightened around the paper. She whispered the name aloud. "James Cross." She looked up. Her face was pale, but her voice didn't shake. "Is this really from him?" Keanu nodded. "It was found in an old camera, one he gave to a woman named Eleanor Holt before he shipped out." Angela nodded slowly, repeating the name. "Eleanor. He never knew about you," Keanu continued. "He left the letter for you inside the camera roll. She only just had the film developed. It's been sealed since 1971. Angela held the letter tighter. "I don't understand. Why did he hide it? Why didn't my mother tell me?" "I don't know," Keanu said gently. "But I do know he tried. In the only way he could." Angela opened the envelope again. This time, she found the photograph. the one Jimmy had taken. Eleanor smiling through tears in the frame, and the message on the back, scrawled hastily in his handwriting. If I don't come home, find her. She'll need to know the truth. For my daughter. Jimmy. Angela stared at it for a long time, then looked up again. She kept this? She asked. Keanu nodded. And still alive. She might. Angela placed both items on her desk like glass. Her fingers hovered just above them, reluctant to let go, but not quite able to hold them either. Where is she? She finally asked. 2 hours south, Keanu said. Still runs a small antique store. Her name's not on many things anymore. But she's been holding on to a memory for 50 years. Angela swallowed. I want to meet her. Not because I need to forgive anything, just I need to know the rest. Keanu smiled softly. She said the same. That evening, Angela didn't go home right away. She drove instead to the lake on the edge of town, a quiet place she hadn't visited since her own daughter left for college. The water was calm, dark with early dusk, and the surrounding trees swayed gently in the wind. She sat on a bench near the shoreline and opened the letter again. Reading it outside, under the sky, made it feel different, as if she could almost hear his voice between the lines. There was pain in the letter, but more than that, there was tenderness, regret, and hope. Angela had lived most of her life thinking her father had vanished without a trace, that he'd chosen absence. But now she understood that wasn't the full story, maybe not even half of it. She didn't feel betrayed. She felt. When she returned home, she opened an old box from the back of her closet. It held the few things her mother had left behind: letters, church bulletins, photographs. There, tucked inside a folded paper napkin, was a single, undeveloped, negative strip. She held it to the light. There was an image of a man, barely visible, cut from view but holding a baby in his lap. Angela closed her eyes. She wasn't imagining it anymore. The next morning, she called the number Keanu had left on the back of his business card. I'm ready, she said. Can you tell her that? Keanu, who had been sitting in a diner sipping his first coffee of the day, smiled and replied, She already knows. Then he added, She's setting a place for tea. Angela laughed quietly. It was the first real laugh she'd had in weeks. Of course she is. 2 hours later, Keanu waited outside Eleanor's antique store as Angela pulled up. She stepped out of her car slowly, holding nothing in her hands. Nothing but the wind blowing through her hair and the letter pressed to her chest. She paused at the front door, as if to catch her breath. Eleanor appeared in the window. Their eyes met. No words, no fanfare. Just recognition. Angela walked forward, and Eleanor opened the door. Their gazes held. And as Angela crossed the threshold, Eleanor reached out, not for a handshake, not for explanation, but for something simpler. Her hand. Angela took it. Together, they stepped into the store, into the truth, and into whatever came next. That night, Keanu sat alone on the porch of the cottage, the sky above him thick with stars. His phone rested on his knee. He opened the anonymous page he'd been curating quietly since the beginning, where strangers answered questions no one else had dared to ask aloud. Tonight, he typed, Hit on De Niro. If you could ask one question to someone you lost, what would it be? He hit post. Then, waited. The first reply came within minutes. Why did you leave? Then another. Did you ever think of me? More followed. Was I ever enough? Did you regret not saying goodbye? Each answer settled in Keanu's chest like stones in still water. He read them all. But then came one that stopped him. Was it my fault you never came back? There was no name, just the words. The moment he read it, Keanu knew who had written it. Angela. Earlier that day, she had been calm, almost steady, but underneath, he sensed the tremor. Now, in this quiet line, it was laid bare. Not anger, not accusation, guilt. Across town, Eleanor sat in the back of her antique shop. a worn blanket across her lap. She didn't know why she was online. Her internet use had always been limited to crossword sites and the occasional recipe. But tonight, she felt drawn somewhere. A link had sat open on her screen for hours. A public post with a single question. If you could ask one question to someone you lost, what would it be? She had ignored it all afternoon. But now, with the store closed and the town quiet, she clicked. The screen filled with replies, words she recognized in her bones. And then, she saw it. Was it my fault you never came back? The tears surprised her. Not because they came, but because of how fast. She hadn't cried like this in years, not even when she stood at Jimmy's memorial, where his name was carved into the stone alongside hundreds of others. Not even when the folded flag arrived. But this single sentence, written by someone she didn't know, undid her. She typed, without thinking, did she ever know I wasn't the only one who loved him? She didn't know why she used she. She didn't know who she even was, but her hands trembled as she hit post. Somewhere, the words would find their way to someone else. Maybe even the girl with the torn photograph. Angela couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, her laptop screen casting a pale glow across the room. Her tea had gone cold, untouched. The photo of her as a toddler lay beside her, face of the man next to her still torn out, as it had been since she was a child. She kept coming back to the comment she'd left anonymously. Was it my fault you never came back? She hadn't planned to write it. It just spilled out. The moment she hit send, she'd felt exposed, foolish even. But as the seconds passed, something shifted. There was relief in letting the words go, like she'd been holding them in for decades without realizing it. She refreshed the page. That's when she saw it. Did she ever know I wasn't the only one who loved him? Angela blinked. She read it again. It didn't feel random. It felt familiar, as if someone out there had been carrying a weight similar to her own. Another woman. Maybe someone who had loved him too. Maybe someone who never got to ask her own questions. Angela leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. Could this be her? The other name. The one her mother had only whispered once, in a fight, when Angela was 15. You were never his only secret. She hadn't understood then. But now, pieces were clicking into place. Pieces no one had ever helped her fit together. Across town, Eleanor reread her own words. She didn't expect a response. She didn't want one. She just wanted the thought out in the open, where the ache might lose its edge. But then, another comment appeared, just 3 simple words. I needed this. No name. No context. But it made her sit up straighter. She pressed a hand to her chest, as if to keep her heart from unraveling. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't talking into a void. Someone had heard her. And it wasn't over. That same night, Keanu watched both comments appear. He didn't know who would see what. He didn't know how long it would take before the pieces aligned. But something was happening. Not in words spoken aloud, but in the spaces between them. In anonymous echoes. In fragile questions. In the place where love had been left waiting too long. He closed the browser, slid his notebook across the table, and wrote just one line. Even silence remembers. The next morning, the town felt different. Angela walked to school beneath a gray sky, the kind that holds rain but doesn't release it. Every step felt heavier, as if the questions she'd posted the night before had rearranged something inside her. At her desk, she opened the drawer where she kept the torn photo. She turned it over. For the first time in years, she studied the back. There was no writing, just the texture of old paper and fingerprints left by time. But her thoughts were elsewhere. On a woman's voice she didn't know, on a question typed into the void that still echoed in her chest. Did she ever know I wasn't the only one who loved him? Angela closed her eyes. What if she had? What if there had been someone who knew Jimmy before he became a uniform, before the war took him? Someone who loved the version of him that Angela never got to meet? She thought of her students, How many of them carried silences they couldn't name? How many of them sat in class every day with half a story inside their chest? Angela opened her laptop and went back to the thread. She reread her comment. Was it my fault you never came back? And then, quietly beneath it, she typed a reply. If someone else loved him too, I think I'd like to meet her. No name, no details, just a whisper into the same shared space. At that same hour, Eleanor opened the shop early. She didn't know why. Something about the morning felt urgent. She walked past the dusty glass display cases and sat by the radio, but she didn't turn it on. Instead, she opened the browser again, unsure what she was even looking for. Then she saw it. Knew her back. One line. Simple. Brave. I think I'd like to meet her. She stared at the screen for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them over her lap. She didn't cry this time. She didn't smile either. She simply breathed and whispered to no one at all. Then maybe it's time. In a quiet corner of town, one woman stood up from her chair. In another woman sat still and waited. Neither of them knew yet what would come next, but the silence between them was finally beginning to speak. Eleanor hadn't seen the album in decades. It was the kind of thing you forget until someone reminds you where to look. When Keanu came back through the door, his voice soft but certain, she knew what he was about to say before he even began. I found her, he said. Eleanor didn't answer at first. She looked past him, toward the back office, her mind already walking the hall of old memories. Her name's Angela, he added. She teaches middle school. She had a picture of Jimmy. Torn. Eleanor's eyes didn't move, but a slight tremor passed through her hands. She wants to meet, Keanu said gently. No pressure, just truth. The words settled between them like dust. Eleanor slowly stood and walked toward the back room, her steps quieter than usual, like she didn't want to disturb the ghosts. She reached the tall metal filing cabinet in the corner and pulled the lowest drawer. It resisted. She tugged again, and it gave way with a screech that echoed off the old wood-paneled walls. From the back, she retrieved a wrapped cloth bundle tied loosely with a pale blue ribbon. She placed it on the counter and slowly unwrapped it. The photo album was thick with yellowing pages. Its corners were bent, and some of the plastic sleeves had curled, but the images inside were vivid. Jimmy hated pictures, Eleanor murmured with a faint smile. But I convinced him once, just once. The day before he shipped out. Keanu leaned closer as she turned the pages. There he was, young, alive, his eyes full of mischief. In one, he was leaning against a bicycle rack, with Eleanor beside him, her head tipped toward his shoulder. Another showed him in uniform, barely out of boyhood. Tucked between two pages was something else. A dried flower, a blue forget-me-not, pressed carefully, its petals brittle but whole, and behind it, a folded note. Eleanor blinked. I didn't know this was here. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the small paper. The writing was unmistakably Jimmy's. She read it aloud. I couldn't stay with either of you, but I prayed you'd both find each other someday. Keanu's eyes met hers. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. Then Eleanor pressed the flower back between the pages and whispered, He tried. Keanu stayed seated as Eleanor traced the edges of the album. She wasn't looking at the pictures anymore. She was feeling them. Each one was a window, and behind each window was a life that had paused long ago, waiting for someone to return. I never knew, she whispered. I never even suspected he had a child. Keanu's voice was gentle. It was a different time. Things weren't always said. She nodded slowly, and some things were buried. He gave her space, letting the silence stretch like a balm instead of a wound. I used to think I was the unfinished part of his story, Eleanor said after a while. But maybe we were both pieces, just not meant to fit then. Keanu reached for his notebook, flipped to a page, and held it out. Angela's name. her phone number. A short description Eleanor had never expected to see. Angela Cross, 54, biology teacher. Never met her father. Has questions. Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. She stared at the handwriting like it was a second note from Jimmy, as if the message had traveled decades to land in her lap now. She might understand if you didn't want to meet, Keanu added. She's not looking for anything, just clarity. That word again. Clarity. Eleanor stood up. Slowly, but with purpose. She walked to the old landline on the wall, its cord twisted and faded from years of sun. She lifted the receiver, then hesitated, her finger hovering above the dial. I can call if you want, Keanu offered. Eleanor shook her head. No. I need to hear her voice. I need her to hear mine. She began dialing. Each number clicked like a note being played. I let it read. Then, hello? The voice was younger than she expected, but firm, controlled. Eleanor cleared her throat. Is this Angela Cross? Yes. Who's calling? My name is Eleanor Holt. I believe you may have known my... Jimmy crossed. A long time ago. The line went silent. Eleanor waited. Then, softly, my father. Yes. A long exhale on the other end. I didn't think he had anyone. Eleanor smiled, faintly. Neither did I. But it seems we were both wrong. Angela didn't respond right away, but when she did, her voice cracked around the edges. Why now? Because sometimes, Eleanor said, her eyes on the dried flower still sitting beside her. The past waits for the right hands to hold it. Angela whispered, I think I've been waiting too. The next day, Eleanor brewed tea she hadn't touched in years. Jasmine, Jimmy's favorite. She placed 2 mismatched cups on the kitchen table, not for use, but for readiness. Across from them sat a fresh notepad and a pen. Eleanor didn't know what she would say, but she wanted to be ready if the words came. Meanwhile, Keanu stood quietly on the sidewalk outside, speaking softly into his phone. Sunday afternoon, she's open to meeting but nervous. It'll be at Eleanor's place, he said. No pressure. Angela's voice trembled but held steady. I think I'd regret it if I didn't. That evening, Keanu returned to Eleanor's shop. She was in the back, sorting old books by candlelight. The photo album was now on the counter, open to a page that had never meant much. Until now. Jimmy, seated on the campus lawn, laughing into the camera. Beside him, Eleanor's younger self, eyes shy but certain. A moment captured with no knowledge of what would come. She looked up as Keanu entered, brushing her hands clean. Do you think she'll come? She asked. Keanu gave a small nod. She's scared. But she said something I think you should hear. Elena waited. She said, I want to meet the woman he trusted with the last piece of himself. Eleanor's lips parted. For once, she had no reply. Only tears. Outside, the late sun began to set, casting warm streaks of gold across the glass windows of the store. The past had waited long enough. And now, it was time to begin something new. Angela Cross arrived at Eleanor's doorstep just as the sun began to dip behind the hills. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, and the porch light flickered on automatically, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Angela stood for a moment at the bottom of the stairs, her fingers curled around the strap of her leather bag. Her breath caught in her chest. Eleanor opened the door before Angela could knock. Her eyes, though older and lined with time, were gentle and clear. She didn't smile, not right away, but she stepped aside and said softly, You made it. Angela nodded, her voice locked behind nerves. She stepped inside, then followed Eleanor through the quiet house to the back porch. 2 rocking chairs waited, angled toward the garden, where lavender bushes rustled in the wind. Eleanor gestured for Angela to sit. They sat in silence at first, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full, heavy with memory neither of them owned yet somehow still shared. Eleanor's fingers curled around a folded paper in her lap. After a moment, she held it out. Angela took it with both hands. It was the photo, the one Eleanor had found in the developed film. Her younger self, tearfully smiling. On the back, the handwriting that changed everything. "If I don't come home, find her. She'll need to know the truth. For my daughter, Jimmy." Angela traced the ink with her finger. Her throat tightened. "I never knew," Eleanor said quietly. "He never told me about you." Angela's reply came slowly, her voice careful. "And I never really knew him." They looked at each other for the first time with something deeper than curiosity. Recognition. Not of a shared past, but a shared absence. Angela exhaled. "My mother never spoke about him, not really, just said he left before I could remember, that he had no interest in being a father." Eleanor looked down. "That wasn't true. I know that now." The porch creaked beneath them as the rocking chairs moved ever so slightly in rhythm with the breeze. Between them lay the photograph. Two versions of love folded into one moment, inked and captured before time tore them apart. Eleanor hesitated. "I loved him, Angela. I thought he was going to come home. I kept that photo album, as if it would bring him back." Angela said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "I think he loved us both. Just differently." The words weren't bitter, only real. Eleanor reached for the photo album resting beside her on the small wicker table. She opened it slowly, the pages yellowed but carefully preserved. Inside were pictures from another lifetime. Jimmy in a college sweatshirt, Jimmy holding a guitar under a tree, Jimmy laughing, with his head thrown back as if he had all the time in the world. Angela leaned in, drawn to every image. "He used to thumb to himself, Moonla," Eleanor said quietly. "Always some half-written melody he never finished. Drove me mad sometimes, but now I wish I'd remembered the tune." Angela gave a soft laugh. "I used to hum too. When I was little, I'd sing nonsense to myself in the dark. My mom would come in and tell me to stop, but I couldn't help it. It made me feel safe." Eleanor turned another page. Maybe it was the same song. Angela looked over at her with surprise. "Do you think maybe that's possible?" Eleanor smiled gently. "I think love finds strange ways of staying alive." Ha! Angela's eyes welled up. She didn't wipe them away. For the next few minutes, they turned the pages together, not saying much. One photo showed Jimmy holding a Polaroid camera, pointing it at the person behind the lens, most likely Eleanor. His eyes sparkled, full of that youthful bravado Eleanor remembered so well. "Wasn't perfect," she murmured. Angela nodded. "But maybe he tried to be." Eleanor closed the album and placed it between them. "I spent decades wondering if I should have moved on," she said. "But now I think maybe the waiting had a purpose." Angela glanced down at her hands. "I've lived my whole life thinking I was someone's mistake. Seeing that photo, reading that note, it's the first time I thought maybe I wasn't." Eleanor reached over and gently laid her hand atop Angela's. "You weren't." Angela took a shaky breath. "And neither were you." They sat that way as the last of the light bled from the sky. Somewhere inside the house, a clock ticked softly. The night air grew cooler, but neither moved. They didn't need more words, just the truth between them. Quiet, waiting, shared. Angela looked out toward the garden, where a wind chime stirred. "I never got to love him," she whispered. "But maybe we can share the rest." Eleanor's voice trembled as she replied, "I'd like that." They didn't let go of each other's hand. Keanu watched from the edge of the driveway, his footsteps soft on the gravel. He didn't want to intrude, not on a moment like this. But something in the stillness on that porch felt like it needed to be witnessed. if only silently. Eleanor finally broke the quiet. He told me once in a letter that he was afraid of becoming a ghost, not the kind in stories, but the kind people forget, the kind who leaves no trace. Angela nodded, her voice nearly gone. That's how I felt about him, like he was a shadow I could never step into, just stories and fragments, nothing real. Eleanor stood slowly, her knees stiff but her back straight. She went inside for a moment and returned, holding a small, folded paper. It had yellowed at the edges, the ink faded but legible. "This," she said, handing it over, "was the last thing he gave me before he left. I thought it was a goodbye, but now, reading it again, it's something else." Angela unfolded the note. The handwriting was careful. Jimmy's words read, "If this reaches you too late, I hope you know I tried to do right. I didn't choose distance. I chose silence. And I pray one day that silence brings you to each other." Angela read it twice, then a third time, her lips moving silently. The note trembled in her hands, but she smiled through the tears. "I think he was braver than I thought," she said. Eleanor whispered, "He just didn't have the time." Keanu approached slowly, his hands in his coat pockets. He didn't say much, just offered a small nod to Eleanor, then to Angela. The kind of nod that said, "You're not alone. I'm here if you need me. But this is your moment." Angela took a breath. "Would you stay for a little while longer?" she asked him. Keanu sat on the top step beside them. He didn't say a word. Eleanor looked at the sky, the last traces of gold fading into soft twilight. "I used to think closure was something loud, a speech, a ceremony. But maybe it's this." Angela turned her head. "What?" Eleanor smiled, sitting with the unanswered, letting it rest. Angela reached down and picked up a single dried leaf from the porch floor. She twirled it between her fingers, then tucked it into the album's back pocket. "Never got to hold me," she said. "But I'm glad he held you." Eleanor looked at her and nodded. "And I'm glad you found me." There was no need for music or a big declaration. The three of them just sat there, breathing in the quiet, as if Jimmy's presence still lingered, just beyond the porch rail, smiling at the two women he never stopped loving. Eleanor held the camera in her lap for a long time before speaking. The porch was quiet, the breeze soft. Angela sat beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes drifting between the weathered photo of her father and the object Eleanor cradled with such care. The air between them held the weight of decades, filled with the silences of a man neither of them truly got to say goodbye to. Eleanor turned the camera over gently, fingers tracing the ridges of its body like one might a memory. Then, without ceremony, she lifted it and placed it into Angela's hands. "Meant this for you," she said, her voice steady but full. Angela looked down at the metal in her lap, its cool surface almost vibrating in her palms. Her fingers trembled as she touched the shutter button, the lens, the leather grip worn smooth with time. Tears didn't fall right away. For a few seconds, she just held it. Then she slowly lifted it to her face, peering through the viewfinder. Her breath hitched. "It's like he's looking back," she whispered. Eleanor's throat tightened. Angela lowered the camera and looked over at the woman who, until days ago, had been a nameless thread in a past she thought she'd never unravel. "Did you ever think you'd give this away?" Eleanor shook her head. "For years, I couldn't even look at it. It sat in a box under blankets in the attic. I told myself I was preserving something, but really I was just afraid of what I'd find." Angela ran her thumb across the dial, pausing at the carved initials on the bottom. "JC. He said he'd come back and show me the photos himself," Eleanor said. "And I waited. I waited for letters, phone calls, for his voice in the hallway. I waited until I couldn't anymore." Angela pressed the camera to her chest like a fragile heirloom, her shoulders shaking now. "My mom never talked about him, not once. I think she was hurt, or maybe ashamed. I don't know. But I always felt like I was walking beside a ghost." Eleanor reached across the space between them and gently covered Angela's hand with her own. You weren't walking beside a ghost. You were walking beside a man who never got the chance to choose. Angela nodded slowly, but he still left something behind. They sat in silence for several moments, the kind of stillness that feels holy, the kind that doesn't need filling. From a distance, near the end of the porch steps, Keanu stood with his arms crossed and eyes lowered. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The camera had done what it was always meant to do. It had carried a truth too long buried and placed it into the hands of the one who needed it most. Angela kept the camera in her lap, staring down at it like it might move, or breathe, or speak. Her voice came low, almost apologetic. I used to dream about him, you know. But I didn't know it was him. I just dreamed of a man in a uniform, standing at a door he never opened. I'd wake up crying sometimes, without knowing why. Eleanor's fingers tightened just slightly over Angela's hand. Maybe that was him. Maybe he came back the only way he could. Angela blinked hard, then looked out past the porch rail at the long stretch of sky turning from gray to soft gold. Do you think he ever meant to tell me? I don't know, Eleanor said gently. But I know he wrote something. That note on the back of the photo. That wasn't for me. That was his last breath, passed forward. Angela nodded. Then maybe it's enough. Keanu stepped forward now, his footsteps quiet on the old wooden boards. He didn't speak right away, just offered a small smile and a nod, as if asking permission to join them. Eleanor gestured to the rocking chair across from them, and he sat, folding his hands in his lap. Thank you, Angela said to him, for helping find all this, for not pushing too hard. Keanu smiled softly. Sometimes things come back when we stop chasing and start listening. Angela turned to the camera in her hands again. You think I should take it with me? Eleanor tilted her head. I think you already have. Angela breathed in, deeply, as if trying to fill her lungs with something more than just air. I'll keep it safe. You don't have to keep it locked away, Eleanor said, her voice stronger now. Use it. Let it see what he never could. Angela looked down at the device. So old, so fragile, and nodded. Maybe I will. A silence passed between the three of them, not awkward or strained, but full. A silence that wrapped itself around memory and loss and the strange, quiet joy of connection found too late, but not too late to matter. From the end of the porch, a breeze picked up and stirred the chimes that hung near the door. They rang once, softly, like a voice returning after a long absence. Angela looked up at the sound, then smiled. Feels like a door finally opened. Eleanor wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. And someone walked through. Keanu leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for just a moment. The wind passed gently across them. The light deepened. And somewhere behind it all, the camera waited, not just as a relic, but as a witness. Later that evening, as the sun finally dipped beneath the trees, Angela stood beside her car, holding the camera in both hands. She hadn't let go of it since Eleanor passed it to her. It rested against her chest, like a memory made solid. Eleanor came out onto the porch, wrapped in a light shawl. You sure you're okay driving back tonight? Angela nodded. Yeah, I think I need the time. I'll play that song on the radio again, the one I used to listen to without knowing why it made me cry. Eleanor smiled. Now you know. Angela stepped forward, embracing her. This time, Eleanor didn't hesitate. They held each other tightly, not as strangers, not as two women caught in the same orbit of grief, but as something else. Something like family. I'll call, Angela said. I'd like that. Keanu stood just beyond the porch steps, hands tucked into his coat pockets. He gave Angela a quiet nod, the kind that held more weight than words. She looked at him for a long moment, then asked gently, Why did you help us? Keanu looked down at the ground, then up again. Because Some stories don't get their ending unless someone listens. Angela held his gaze. Thank you for listening. He gave a half smile. Thank you for finishing the story. She got into her car and started the engine, the headlights casting soft light over the driveway as dusk fell. The camera sat beside her on the passenger seat, angled just right so the lens caught a glint of fading sunlight. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone had turned on the light in a room she'd always lived in, but never truly seen. As the car disappeared down the dirt road, Eleanor and Keanu remained on the porch, side by side. Eleanor exhaled slowly. I thought letting go meant forgetting, but maybe. It just means giving it to someone who still needs it. Keanu looked out over the horizon, and she needed it. They sat in the stillness a while longer, until Eleanor spoke again. It's strange. All this time, that camera was just sitting in my attic. I used to tell myself it didn't matter what was on it, but it did. It mattered to her. Keanu turned to her, his voice low. It mattered to both of you. She nodded. And now, it belongs to someone who never got the chance to ask the questions. The wind rustled the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out once, then fell silent. And under the quiet night sky, the camera had found its rightful hands. That evening, Keanu sat in the warmth of a quiet cafe, a tea cooling in front of him, phone in hand. He opened the app where he'd posted another question, the same one he'd asked Eleanor earlier that week, but now to the world. The prompt read, "What's something you inherited that told you a story?" He refreshed the screen. Replies poured in from every corner of the internet. "My grandfather's compass," one user wrote. "He carried it through World War II. I still follow it when I feel lost." Another wrote, "My mom's worn-out cookbook, every stain has a memory. I cried the first time I made her banana bread. It tasted exactly like her hugs." A third message appeared, simple, quiet, a photo that changed everything. Keanu paused. He reread that one. It wasn't long, but it held weight, like someone out there had gone through something no one else could understand. Until now. He scrolled further. There was one from a young woman. An old wristwatch. It didn't work, but when I wore it, I felt like I was still on time with my dad. Another said, "A suitcase filled with letters my parents wrote each other in secret. I didn't know they were ever in love." One reply stood out. A roll of undeveloped film. I finally processed it last month. It showed me the face of a brother I never met. Keanu stopped. He read that one a few times, then he bookmarked it. Across town, Angela sat in her small living room, the camera on her lap. She hadn't opened the back again, not yet, but she held it the way someone would cradle something fragile and irreplaceable. She didn't comment on Keanu's post, but she read it more than once. In her notebook, she scribbled one line. "Inheritance is not always an object. Sometimes it's a silence that finally speaks." Back at the cafe, Keanu tucked his phone away, took a sip of his tea, and looked out the window. The sky had darkened, but somewhere beyond the clouds, he felt light returning. Eleanor was asleep by then, the photo album still open beside her. Her reading glasses had slid down her nose, and her hand rested gently on a photo of Jimmy in uniform, smiling. And in 3 different homes, on 3 different bedsides, sat the same object. A memory that didn't speak in words, but through worn pages, faded film, and the quiet comfort of something finally returned. Angela finally picked up her phone. For hours, she had avoided replying to the thread Keanu had posted. But something inside her stirred as she scrolled through the comments again. A woman had written, "My dad's lighter. It still smells like his cologne. I've never lit it." Another person had shared, "A folded flag in a glass case. It used to be just decoration. Now it's a story I tell my kids." Angela's fingers hovered over the screen. Then, with a breath she didn't know she was holding, she typed, "An empty frame that used to have a photo. I used to stare at the missing part and wonder what face belonged there. Today, I found out it was mine. She didn't attach her name. She didn't need to. Across town, Keanu's phone buzzed softly on the table beside his chair. He opened the notification and read the comment. Something about the phrasing, the ache behind the words, made him pause. He didn't know for sure, but he felt it. This was her. He bookmarked it, not for show, just to keep it close. Eleanor, meanwhile, sat by her fireplace, thumbing through old envelopes. She had found one earlier that afternoon. A birthday card Jimmy had never sent. It wasn't even addressed. Inside, it simply said, "To whoever you become, I hope you always remember who you came from." Her hand trembled as she reread it. It had never occurred to her that Jimmy had tried to write to his daughter, that he tried to leave something behind for both of them. And maybe, in some small way, he had. She folded the card and slid it into a fresh envelope. On the front, she wrote in delicate script, "To Angela, from us both." And she turned off the lamp and let the silence settle in around her. It wasn't heavy tonight. It was gentle. Back in the cafe, Keanu scrolled through the last of the replies. One young man had written, "I inherited my mom's garden gloves. I plant the same flowers she used to grow. I think she'd smile at how many bloom now." Another post read, "A music box with a broken key. It used to sing. Now it hums. I still hear her in it." The comments weren't just about things. They were bridges. Threads that pulled memory across generations, places, and losses. Keanu stood, stretched, and grabbed his coat. He left a tip on the table and walked out into the early night. As the door swung closed behind him, the last notification lit up his screen. "Thank you for asking. No one ever asked before." He didn't need to reply. Sometimes just listening was enough. Later that night, Angela sat on her front steps, camera in her lap. It was heavier than she expected, not just in weight, but in history. She hadn't pressed the shutter, not yet. Something about holding it made her feel like she was part of something larger, like a sentence her father had started but never finished. Inside the camera bag, nestled between the padding, she found one last slip of paper she hadn't noticed. It was folded twice, aged with time. The ink had faded but was still legible. "To the one I'll never meet, take one photo of the world you see. Maybe it'll bring us closer." She clutched the note to her chest, a tear finally sliding down her cheek. The next morning, as the light broke across the lawn, Angela raised the camera. She didn't pose anything, didn't wait. She simply turned toward the rising sun and clicked the shutter. Across town, Keanu sat on Eleanor's porch, a mug of tea in his hands. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of stories waiting to be passed down, and one by one they were being told. Angela hadn't planned on visiting her mother's attic again. The space above her childhood home still smelled faintly of cedar and dust, a place she used to hide during storms as a girl. This time, she climbed the wooden stairs with a question in her heart, and the camera her father once held resting quietly in her bag. She moved past the old trunk filled with linens, the cracked mirror, and the baby stroller no one had used in decades. In the far corner, under a stack of yellowed newspapers, was a shoebox she didn't remember seeing before. Taped shut with brittle masking tape, the lid had a faint ink smudge. J.C. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled. Downstairs in Eleanor's kitchen, the shoebox sat on the table between two mugs of tea. Angela peeled the tape and lifted the lid. Inside were neatly folded letters, each one addressed in her mother's handwriting to Jimmy. "I didn't even know she kept these," Angela whispered. Eleanor leaned forward, eyes soft with something between fear and tenderness. Angela picked up the first letter. Her voice shook as she read aloud. "Dear Jimmy, I'm sorry I said you should leave. I was scared. You smiled through it, like always. But I knew you weren't coming back." She paused, blinking hard. Eleanor placed a hand gently over hers. "Another letter. She's crawling now. Angela has your stubbornness. I see it in the way she throws her spoon when she doesn't get her way." Angela let out a soft laugh through the tears. Letter after letter, each written and folded but never sent. They painted a picture Angela had never known. Her mother wasn't bitter. She wasn't silent. She had just never let the letters go. Until now. Angela sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, the shoebox open between them. She unfolded the next letter slowly, her fingers trembling less than before. "August 9th, 1972, she read. "Dear Jimmy, I took Angela to the lake today. She has your eyes, wide and curious. She threw a rock into the water and said, 'Daddy's in the sky, watching it skip.' I told her you were a good man. I told her everything I remembered. I hope that was enough." Eleanor's hand was wrapped around a mug of tea, now gone cold. Her gaze stayed fixed on the table, her face unreadable. But her shoulders had softened. Her silence was no longer distance, it was reverence. Angela looked up and whispered, "She never stopped talking to him." "She never sent any of these?" Eleanor asked gently. Angela shook her head. "I don't think she thought he'd want them. She always said he left because he didn't love us." "But that wasn't true," Eleanor said. "That last photo, that note, he wanted you to know." Angela picked up another letter. "This one just says, 'I wish I could tell her who you were.'" Her voice broke on the last word. Eleanor stood and moved slowly around the table. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside Angela and took her hand. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, the late afternoon light drifted through the lace curtains, casting quiet patterns on the floor. The kind of light that made you feel like the world had paused, like it was listening. Angela reached for another letter but hesitated. "Do you want me to read one?" Eleanor offered. Angela nodded, unable to form words. Eleanor chose one folded near the bottom. She unfolded it with the care of someone unwrapping a fragile gift. "October 3rd, 1975, she read, her voice steady but soft. "Dear Jimmy, Angela asked today why she didn't have a daddy at her school's family day. I told her not everyone's story starts the same. I didn't tell her mine ended too soon. I didn't tell her I still dream of you on the porch, camera in hand, saying you'd be back before dark. I didn't tell her I'd saved your letters in the box beneath my bed, or that I'd tried to hate you and couldn't." Angela closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. Eleanor placed the letter down, not in the box, but between them. "She loved him," Angela whispered. "They both did," Eleanor replied. Angela wiped her face and looked around the kitchen. "This is the kind of place my mother would have liked. She's welcome in it," Eleanor said. "Even now." Angela managed a small smile. "So is he." They sat there, two women decades apart in age but forever bound by the same silence, the same grief, the same man who loved them both in different ways. The kitchen became their chapel, the letters their gospel. And in that quiet moment, it felt like Jimmy Cross had finally come home. Later that evening, the shoebox was nearly empty. A few envelopes remained, yellowed and brittle, but neither of them rushed to finish. Angela leaned back in her chair, her voice quieter now, not from fatigue, but from reverence. "You know," she said, "for the longest time, I thought love was something you had to earn, that maybe I didn't deserve a father because I wasn't good enough." Eleanor shook her head. "Angela, you were never the one who had to earn it. You were the reason it existed at all." Angela looked down, then smiled through tears. "I wish I could tell him that I understand, that I'm not angry anymore." Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. She opened it carefully and turned it toward Angela. Inside was a faded black and white photo of Jimmy, no older than 21, his eyes bright and unsure. "He carried this with him when he left for basic training," Eleanor said, "and I carried it after he was gone. Maybe it's time someone else carried it now." Angela hesitated, then took the locket with both hands. Her fingers closed around it slowly, as if taking hold of something that had waited too long to be held. "I don't even know what to do with all this," she said. "How do you carry a story that was never told?" "You tell it now," Eleanor said gently. "In the ways that matter, with kindness, with honesty. You give it to others." Angela nodded. "Maybe that's how we keep him alive." Eleanor's eyes filled. "I think he'd like that." They packed the letters together, one by one, carefully tucking them back into the box, not to hide them again, but to keep them safe. When they were done, Angela placed the lid back on and said, "I think we should read these on camera." Eleanor looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I work with teens, remember? Some of them have lost people. Some don't even know where they came from. I think if they heard this, if they saw that healing can happen even 50 years later, it might matter." Eleanor thought for a moment. Then slowly she nodded. "If that's what you feel called to do, I'll read them with you." Angela smiled. 2 voices, 1 story, finally told. As the evening wore on, Keanu returned to the porch. The screen door creaked gently as he stepped inside. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched as the 2 women, once strangers bound by grief, now sat together in the kitchen under the hum of a soft yellow bulb. Angela looked up. "We're thinking about sharing these letters. Maybe others need them too." Keanu smiled. "They will." No one said anything more. There was no need. In that room, the silence wasn't absence. It was memory made whole. Words once unsent had finally found their way home. And in the echo of those pages, Jimmy's love lived again. The local library hadn't seen an exhibit in years, not since the renovations closed off its old community hall. But when Eleanor stepped through the worn double doors with a cardboard box tucked beneath her arm, the space seemed to breathe again. It smelled faintly of dust and books and old hope. Angela followed close behind, her arms full of photo frames wrapped in brown paper. They had named it "The Faces We Wait For." It was Eleanor's idea, inspired by something Jimmy once said to her. He believed everyone spent their life waiting for someone, sometimes to come home, sometimes to be remembered, sometimes just to be understood. Angela set the camera photo gently on the table near the entrance. It would be the first thing people saw. In the picture, she stood holding Jimmy's old camera with both hands, her eyes open, searching, while Eleanor stood slightly behind her, smiling with quiet strength. Keanu had taken that photo just a few days earlier, and neither of them had realized, until they saw the print, how much it already said without words. The exhibit came together slowly, lovingly. Jimmy's black and white photos filled the left side of the room. Snapshots of a college campus in spring, an old red bicycle leaning against a bookstore, a group of friends laughing around a fountain. One photo in particular showed Eleanor sitting cross-legged on a patch of grass, reading aloud from a novel. Her hair was pinned back. The moment was so still, so timeless, that Angela had stared at it for almost an hour the first time she saw it. "I didn't know he loved you like that." "Evidently he didn't need to tell me," Eleanor replied. "He showed me every time he lifted the camera." On the right side of the room, Angela placed the letters "Some," written by her mother, others by Jimmy, printed carefully on cream-colored boards, each with a handwritten copy beside it. She had transcribed them all, every word, but insisted the originals be included. "They're not just his voice," she said. "They're the echo of everything we never got to ask." Eleanor nodded. "Then we'll give them a place to speak." Visitors came slowly at first. An older couple from town who remembered Jimmy as the boy who ran track. A librarian who'd known Eleanor for decades, but never knew about the man she'd loved. A teenager who asked to take a photo of the letter that read, "If I don't come home, find her." Angela watched them from the corner, her arms crossed gently, unsure if she should feel exposed or proud. But when she saw a father kneel beside his young daughter to explain what a film camera was, she smiled. "Do you think the girl ever got the message?" the child asked. "She did," the father answered. That's why we're here." In the middle of the room stood the final plaque. Keanu had carved it himself from a weathered piece of oak he found near the old track field. The words were burned into the wood, dark and even, in memory of the promises made quietly and kept long after. Eleanor touched the edge of the plaque with her fingers and took a breath. "I used to wonder if memory was enough," she said to Keanu, who stood beside her with his hands in his coat pockets. "If it could be a place to live." He tilted his head. "Maybe it's not about living in memory. Maybe it's about letting memory live somewhere outside of you, somewhere others can touch it." Angela came to stand with them. "Then this place is the body," she said, "and every letter, every photo, is its breath." The exhibit ended with a table covered in blank index cards. A sign encouraged visitors, "Leave a note to someone you're still waiting for." By the end of the first afternoon, over a dozen cards had been placed in the glass bowl beside it. "You would have loved who I became. I wore your jacket today. Still fits. You were my Sunday morning." One card read only, "Thank you for not forgetting him." Angela read it and pressed her hand to her chest. Eleanor placed a hand on her back. They didn't speak again for a long time, and when the sun began to fade through the tall windows of the library, they sat on the bench beneath Jimmy's portrait, listening to nothing but the soft shuffle of pages turning and memory finding its place. That evening, long after the last visitor had gone, Angela stayed behind to tidy the edges of the display. Eleanor moved slowly beside her, folding the linen tablecloths and adjusting a crooked frame. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Angela asked quietly. Eleanor glanced toward the photo of Jimmy, young, bold, frozen in a moment of youth. "I think he'd be surprised," and then very quiet for a long time. He was like that. He felt things in silence. Angela nodded. "I talk a lot. I think I always wanted someone to listen." Eleanor smiled. "Then it's a good thing we found each other." They turned off the lights together, the warm golden glow from the street lamp outside casting soft silhouettes over the exhibit. One last time, they stood before the framed photo of Angela holding the old camera, the lens still shining under the glass. Angela traced the edge of the frame with her finger. "I never thought I'd know him like this. Through you. Through this." "You always knew him," Eleanor said. "You were just waiting for someone to help you remember." Keanu met them outside, leaning against the car, his coat collar turned up against the breeze. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Sometimes memory speaks loudest when no one is talking. The sun broke gently over the hills that morning, casting long streaks of light across the town square. A hush had settled over the crowd gathered near the edge of the park. Rows of folding chairs lined the lawn, some already occupied by quiet faces, many holding small flags, a few with medals pinned to their jackets. A fresh bronze plaque shimmered in the early light, mounted beside the town's marble war memorial. The last name etched into it was new, polished, untouched by weather. James Cross. Eleanor stood beside Angela, both women dressed simply, without fanfare. Eleanor's hand trembled just slightly as she adjusted her coat collar, but her gaze was steady. Angela, standing taller than she felt inside, gripped the vintage camera with both hands, cradling it like something living. Neither woman had spoken much on the ride over, but they didn't need to. This day wasn't about answers anymore. It was about presence, memory, honor. Keanu stood off to the side, just behind the last row of chairs. He didn't take a seat. His hands were in his pockets, his face calm, yet moved. He'd helped arrange everything. Quietly, of course, never asking for thanks. Just one more name carved in bronze. But for these two women, that name was everything. A retired colonel from the local VFW stepped forward to begin the ceremony. He spoke of sacrifice, of war and silence and letters that never made it home. Then, with reverent care, He said Jimmy's name aloud for the first time in decades. James Cross, Private First Class, U.S. Army, killed in action, Vietnam, 1971. There was a pause. Then Eleanor stepped forward. The crowd shifted as she approached the microphone, a small woman with silver hair, her movements deliberate and unshaken. She looked at no one in particular. Then she looked directly at the plaque. "I was 20 years old when I said goodbye to Jimmy Cross," she began softly. "He left me a camera and a promise. I never took a picture again." The silence hung over the crowd like a held breath. I thought his story ended there, but it didn't. Because stories like his, they wait, sometimes for years, sometimes for the right hands to carry them forward. She stepped back, nodding once. Angela came next. She was pale, visibly nervous, her fingers shaking slightly on the microphone, but her voice was steady. "My name is Angela Cross. I never knew my father. I was told he left. I believed it for too long." Her throat tightened. "Today I hold the only thing he left behind, a camera and a truth I never expected. He didn't forget me. He just ran out of time." The audience was still. Some wiped their eyes. Others simply bowed their heads. Angela stepped back. Eleanor reached out and took her hand. And for the first time, the town of Sierra Bend remembered Jimmy Cross not just as a name in uniform, but as a man who loved, who lost, and who left behind a legacy waiting to be found. Angela stepped up next. Her hands shook as she adjusted the strap of the old camera that hung around her neck. She didn't read from paper. She didn't need to. Her voice, though soft, reached every corner of the green where the ceremony was held. My father's name wasn't on any bedtime stories. He wasn't in my memories. Just an echo in old questions, a silence behind every "why not me?" But today I finally know his name belongs here. Not just as Private James Cross, but as the man who tried, in his own way, to reach back through time. She looked toward Eleanor, eyes glossy. "And I'm proud to say I now know the woman he loved, and who loved him back without bitterness. That's something rare. That's something sacred." As she stepped down, the audience stayed still, not because of a lack of applause, but because it didn't feel like a moment that needed it. Silence said more. Keanu had arranged for a modest plaque, nothing ornate, just his name, his rank, and the words, "He kept his promise." It was Eleanor who chose them. After the ceremony, people gathered to place flowers beneath the names. Some touched Jimmy's plaque gently, murmuring their own quiet farewells or thank yous. Others just stood, hands in pockets, moved by something they couldn't quite explain. Angela walked with Eleanor along the edge of the lawn, the sun now soft and golden as it began to dip. She handed Eleanor the camera. "I want you to take one," Angela said. "Of this, of us." Eleanor hesitated, then raised the camera and pressed the shutter. The sound was gentle but clear, like a punctuation mark on a sentence written decades ago. Back at Eleanor's house that evening, the two women sat on the porch with Keanu, sharing stories of the small details they never thought would matter. How Jimmy always tapped his foot when he was nervous. How he once sent Eleanor a single pressed daisy with no note. How Angela used to draw hearts in her notebooks and didn't know why she always included a set of initials she couldn't place. It was Angela who said it first. "I didn't grow up with a father. But today, I met the man he really was, through you." And Eleanor responded with a warmth that only time and loss can shape. "And I met the part of him that lived on in someone else." Keanu didn't say much, only nodded, sipping tea from a chipped mug with fading blue flowers. But before he left that night, he looked at both women and said quietly, he was lucky to have both of you, even if the world took him too soon. As the stars blinked into view, the porch light glowed behind them, and the camera sat between the women. No longer a relic of loss, but a vessel of connection. Tomorrow the photo would be developed, but tonight, they didn't need to see it to know what it meant. The community center echoed with laughter. the kind that spilled from children discovering something new. Angela stood near a table lined with vintage cameras, each one carefully placed, cleaned, and ready for curious hands. She gently showed a young boy how to wind film into a Nikon from the 1970S. "Like this," she said softly, guiding his fingers. "Photography used to be slow. It taught you patience." Beside her, Eleanor adjusted the light by the window, her hand steady despite her age. She held up a small black camera, her voice rich with memory. "This was how we captured time, not just with pictures, but with silence before the click." The children listened. Some nodded, some blinked, but they all sensed that these women weren't just teaching photography. They were passing down something far older, of seeing. It had been Angela's idea to start the program. An after-school film club for kids whose parents or grandparents had served in the military. It wasn't just about cameras, it was about legacy, about remembering in a world that so easily forgot. Keanu arrived just before sunset. He didn't speak to the crowd, he didn't need to. Instead, he stood in the back, quietly watching, as he always did. When one of the kids offered to take his picture, he smiled gently and stepped aside, letting the light fall on Eleanor and Angela instead. Later, after the workshop, Angela approached the small table where Eleanor had placed Jimmy's old camera. She opened the back, carefully removed the last roll of film they'd never developed, and handed it to the lab technician on site. "We'll see what he left us," she whispered. The room dimmed as evening crept in. Parents arrived to pick up their children. The buzz faded into something softer. Just Keanu, Eleanor, Angela, and a few remaining volunteers, tidying up, pouring coffee, folding chairs. When the technician returned with a single print in hand, Angela felt her breath catch. It was blurry, slightly overexposed, and the colors had bled from age, but the image was unmistakable. Two women, side by side, both smiling. Angela recognized Eleanor immediately. But the other woman, she could only guess. Her mother, perhaps. Taken decades ago, maybe by Jimmy himself, just before everything unraveled, just before war, distance, and silence broke what could have been. Angela pressed the photo to her chest. "He saw us," she said. "Both of us." Eleanor placed a hand over hers. "And he kept us." They framed the photo that night. It would hang in the library, next to the memorial exhibit, beside the camera and the letters and the dried flower pressed into a book. A memory made real again. By the following week, the photo hung in a place of quiet honor, on the wall of the community library's new film room. Above it, a small placard simply read, "The Last Frame." Beneath it, two women, one legacy. Kids who had attended the first film club meeting kept returning. Some brought old cameras their families had tucked away. Others brought questions about their parents, their grandparents, or just about the strange way memory hides in corners. Eleanor taught them how to thread film. Angela taught them how to look. "It's not about getting the perfect shot," she'd explain. "It's about asking, what am I afraid to forget?" That's what you aim at. One afternoon, a boy named Malcolm handed Eleanor a photo he'd taken of his grandfather's dog tags lying on a wooden table. He said he didn't want to be remembered as a soldier, Malcolm said. But I think he just didn't want to be forgotten for everything else. Eleanor held the photo to her heart. Then, you're helping him be remembered the right way. Word of the program spread. Veterans began to stop by. Some brought mementos. One woman brought a letter she'd never read from her brother in Korea. Another donated a faded uniform. The room evolved into more than a classroom. It became a sanctuary for stories people were finally ready to tell. Angela set up a shelf labeled Unfinished Rolls. Visitors could leave unprocessed film there, no questions asked. A sign beside it read, "We'll help you develop what you're not ready to face alone." Keanu remained a quiet presence. He never made speeches, but he showed up, sometimes standing near the bookshelf, sometimes sitting near the window. He was always the last to leave. Once, Eleanor caught him staring at the framed photo again, hands in his jacket pockets, his eyes soft. She approached him and said, "He would have liked you, you know." Keanu looked at her. "I don't know about that." "I do," she said. "You don't talk much, but you listen loud." "That's rare." He smiled. "It's easier to hear the story when I'm not trying to tell one." Eleanor chuckled. "Then maybe that's why people trust you with theirs." Before he left that night, he slipped a small black and white photo onto the exhibit table. An image of his uncle's old guitar leaning against a back porch step. No caption, no name. But Eleanor understood. It wasn't about how clear the photo was. It was about what it held. And in that room, the walls held 100 frames and 1,000 quiet goodbyes. The library lights dimmed as the final guests drifted out, leaving only a quiet hush behind. Eleanor and Angela remained by the far wall, where the final photograph hung beneath a soft lamp. The frame was simple. The picture within it, worn at the edges, was the same one Jimmy had taken decades ago. 2 women, smiling. Eleanor didn't remember the moment it was taken. Angela didn't know how the camera captured it, but somehow it felt like the last piece of a story still unfolding. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their silence wasn't empty. It was full. Angela placed the small camera, now clean and still warm from her hands, inside the new display case beside the plaque. She straightened the little paper sign beneath it. "In memory of the promises made quietly and kept long after." Keanu stood a few steps back, watching. He didn't hold a camera. He didn't need to. Some things you don't capture, you carry. Later that evening, Keanu sat at a small diner booth alone, his phone resting on the table beside a cup of black coffee. He opened a new post and typed slowly, "What do you wish someone had told you before they left?" He hit post. Minutes passed. The replies began. "I wish they had told me they were proud of who I'd become. I wish they had said goodbye. I wish they had said they loved me. Even once." And then, one that made him stop scrolling. "I wish they had told me I was enough." He read that one twice, then again. He didn't click like. He didn't comment, but he bookmarked it quietly. In a world filled with noise, sometimes silence says the most. The wind moved outside the windows, brushing past the trees and the streets that had witnessed a story only 3 people ever truly knew. Inside, the small lights of the library stayed on just a little longer. Camera, a letter, a child, soldier, and a woman who waited without knowing what she was waiting for. Some stories aren't finished when they're written. They're finished when someone else is ready to read them. Sometimes, memory isn't about what we recall. It's about what someone else preserved for us. In film, in letters, in love. It lives in the faces we forgot to frame, in the words we didn't know were waiting for us, inside boxes and camera rolls, beneath time, beneath grief. Keanu finished his coffee in silence. He looked out the window, watching the lights of the town glow dimly under the weight of night. Somewhere nearby, 2 women were sleeping peacefully, no longer searching, no longer wondering. He slipped his phone back into his pocket, standing slowly. No need for a goodbye. Some visits weren't about being seen, they were about seeing. And that was enough. The post he made continued to grow. Dozens more comments came in. "I wish they'd told me the pain wouldn't last forever. I wish they'd written me something, anything. I wish they'd explained why they left. And finally, I wish they'd handed me a camera and said, 'Go find beauty, even if you have to look for it in the dark.'" That one stayed with him. And maybe it will stay with you too. So now we ask you, what do you wish someone had told you before they left? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you're still holding on to something you haven't opened, maybe it's time. Next time on this channel, A janitor sweeping the halls of a forgotten school finds a violin case wedged behind a radiator. Inside it, a note. 4 words. This belonged to Leah. What happens next turns an abandoned building into a concert hall and reunites a child with the music she thought she'd lost forever. See you there.